We are taking a break from our Matthew series these last 2 weeks. Last week, we took a moment to celebrate on our 12th anniversary of us as a church existing, to pause and just look at who we are, try to learn from our past and grow and just identify what is the essence of who we are and what makes us different and special, what's our distinctive. And where we landed was it's this idea that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. Right? And that is the essence of what it means for us to live in the spirit of love for others, for ourselves, and for God. And it gives us the freedom, we have complete freedom to love people who disagree with us. We have complete freedom to love people who interpret the Bible differently than we do. We have complete freedom to embrace and love and show affection towards our neighbors who are angry at us or are vehemently against us. We are set free. Oftentimes we look at our faith and say we are set free from sin. We are set free from bondage. We are set free from hell. Well, what are we set free to? We're set free to love. You don't have to hold on to bitterness. You don't have to hold on to a dogma. And the way Jesus talks about this dogma, and Paul refers to it specifically as a veil. We don't have to hide behind a veil of legalism, right? In Paul's context, he was talking about the law and how Christians were adopting the old law and it was separating them. We don't have to use the Bible as a veil to separate us from each other. And in essence, we separate ourselves from God. Jesus has torn down that veil. It doesn't exist anymore. We are free to love and free to serve. And when I look at all the things that make up the essence of Village Church and why we're different and why some people have a hard time with us and why it's because of this commitment to living in this freedom with ourselves and with each other and with the world around us. As we continue this two-part series where we look at today emphasizes the priority and direction of our church as we look at the Great Commission. You see, last week we talked about the Great Commandment. The Great Commandment is that we love God with all we are, and we love our neighbor as ourselves. The Great Commission is that we go and we make disciples of all nations, teaching them all about Jesus to a point where they fall in love with him, to follow him, which is symbolized through baptism. Like that's the essence of the Great Commandment. I would argue that the Great Commission and the Great Commandment are the same command. Because to love someone is to love them with the love of Jesus if you truly love them. You love them unconditionally. You forgive them. You serve them. You share with them your life. And if Jesus is part of your life, you share with them Jesus. Do you see how it's all? So to love someone is to disciple someone, and to disciple someone is to love someone. And we have to resist this very human Western temptation to take this idea of discipleship and make it a program or a system or a goal or a process or a status or a position that we have. When we are free to love and free to serve, and when we come together, if each one of us, if you're a disciple of Jesus, this great commandment to go therefore and make disciples is for you. We're all called to make disciples. Now, if we individually are called to make disciples, what are we as a church collectively called to do? Make disciples, right? So now let's just put this in the context of reality. We as humans don't make anyone do anything. So there's got to be a deeper meaning to these words, right? We don't make someone follow Jesus. But the way we love them and the way we love one another will be a testimony to them of the love of Jesus. And disciple is a unique word. It's a word that's only used in the church context. We have other words out there that mean similar things like mentor and teach, right? And they have, in the Jewish context, in a formal structure, they have a rabbi, right? But what we're talking about in discipleship is a very intentional way to love someone that shows them the love of Jesus and compels them to want to follow. And I think where we get mixed up oftentimes in church and in ministry and in our Christian walk, we mix up evangelism and discipleship. And oftentimes I've heard it taught that evangelism is what you do before someone says this magic phrase about Jesus in your heart and gets baptized. And then discipleship is what happens after that. But my argument is like, well, the disciples followed Jesus for 3 years. Those first 3 years, was that Jesus evangelizing them or discipling them? Because not one of them said anything about Jesus being the Messiah until Peter did in year 3. And they followed him for 3 years. Right? So for us to share the love of Jesus with people that aren't close to Jesus, and for us to share the love of Jesus with people that are following Jesus, it's the same act of love, and I would argue it is all discipleship. You don't make disciples the way I do. Imagine this. All of us came today. The way I like to make disciples, the way I'm wired to make disciples, is to teach and preach. And if we all showed up today and all, whatever number of us are here, started preaching, how would that go? I wouldn't be here, by the way. That'd just be weird. I'd walk in, thanks for the coffee, I'm out. And so when Paul describes how we collectively come together and make disciples, he uses the metaphor of a body. We are all one body. And our collective purpose is to acknowledge and embrace and love one another in the fact that we're all different. We're all wired differently. We all have different gifts and skills. We all have different fears and phobias. And so we are here to cover one another. We're here to work together so we collectively can make disciples of Jesus as we individually are growing in our faith, are trusting God to overcome our fears so we can individually invest in making disciples. Now, there's a very clear way to look at this. You could look at this generationally, right? And that you could say, okay, I just feel like I need to engage with someone who is a generation older or younger than me so discipleship can happen. So teaching each other and growing in our understanding of what it means to follow the commands of Jesus. Not just teaching people about the theology of Christianity. That's not discipleship. That's called Bible college, right? Discipleship is a relationship with someone where they're seeing you and you're known by them and they're known by you, and they're seeing how you love, how you serve. They're also seeing how you fail and how you recover. Now, thinking about this generationally, it has been my conviction that it is the purpose of every generation to raise up the next generation of the church. Some people don't get on board with that. Some people think that the church exists for them today. They don't even think about the next generation. But when look at what Jesus says in this great command that we read. In verse 18, can you put that back up there? In verse 18 of chapter 28, he makes this statement that he says, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Like, what a weird thing to say. Like, so? Good for you, Jesus. Like, good on you. Lucky. But he lays this foundation of authority. And then in the next verse, 19, this is what he says. He says, therefore, what do you mean therefore? Well, because I have been given all authority, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Go. That word go in the Greek, and you might have heard this before, I think it's interesting. It's a participle to the word make disciples. So the action is make disciples, right? And the idea of go is as you are going, make disciples. Like as you are in motion, as you are living your life in the context of the world around you, the people that you're in relationship with, your children, your parents, your neighbors, your supervisor, your employees, your teacher, your fellow students, like you're in relationship with people. As you are doing that, the way you love them will show them the love of Jesus. You will be discipling as you are going about your life. So if you are, like me, if you grew up in the church and you had this Christian guilt because you weren't making disciples, you are set free from that, right? There is a way that Paul describes that everyone has a different role to play for you to serve in a church context with other believers to help you be a part of disciple making as a community, and then personally to help you grow and strengthen and be equipped to be a disciple maker personally. Ephesians 4 says that it's the job of the church leadership to equip you to do the work of the ministry. And the work of the ministry, everything that we do as a church is discipleship. Everything. And I'm not saying that everything we do as a church is leadership development. No, I'm saying discipleship is a very encompassing and powerful term. That when we love, we are teaching people what it looks like to obey all that Jesus has commanded. And again, we don't make people disciples. We love people, and the Holy Spirit does the convicting. God does the drawing. Jesus does the inviting. It's this, we get to watch, stand back and watch what Jesus is going to do when we love people. And you'll be surprised if someone has offended you or betrayed you or sinned against you, and you go to them and you say, I forgive you. That's discipleship. When someone in our society is used to being rejected, neglected, or avoided, and you step into the discomfort of their world, and you show them kindness and love and dignity, you're discipling them. You're teaching them what it looks like to obey all that Jesus has commanded. And it says that you go to all nations in this text. Go therefore to all nations. Now, oftentimes people use that as this global missions mandate. That means we have to go to Asia and Africa and Europe and Antarctica because that's a nation. There's nations there. We have to send people to Antarctica because it says all nations. All nations. I've heard this. It's crazy. Look at it this way, though. Go to all nations. It means no matter what the nationality or the generation, because sometimes like generations feel like a different culture than you, right? Whatever that is around you, you're called to go into it. It means you don't get to avoid generations or nations that make you uncomfortable. It's whoever's around you, all nations, go. Right? As you are going, you're going to run into all different types of people in all different stages and phases of life, and the way you treat them will be either a blessing or a curse. You will either bless them by showing them the love of Jesus, or they'll be cursed by having the wrong idea of what it means to follow Jesus. And as we look at our mission as a church to empower the next generation, and it is shocking how many people aren't on board with this, that the church doesn't exist for us, it always exists for others. And I would ask you, no matter where you are in your church search and commitment to Village or whatever, that you reflect, how do I view church and my role in church as a service to others? That's the heart posture to have in any church. And where people get wrong is when they start thinking, well, this church is for me. And it doesn't have the programs. I don't like the preacher. The worship's awesome, but the carpet's gray, everything's gray. It bothers me, whatever. Who knows, right? Your posture is, oh, this is the church. My position of church is what it does for me. Now, that's not love. To love others is to come into any context and say, how can I play my role for this to be something for others? And that's discipleship. When we come collectively together and do that with that heart posture, now we're talking about discipleship. Yeah. Boy, I wish the sermon ended there, because that's... As we look at this generationally, this call to make disciples isn't just out of thin air. Jesus doesn't just make this up. Because you think about where Jesus is when he's talking to the disciples like this. He has just resurrected, and his transcendent body is now appearing to his disciples. And so this form of Jesus appears to his disciples and he says, all authority has been given to me. And the 12 are looking at him going, you think? Like, this looks like authority to me, right? You have just appeared to us after you died and rose from the grave. Like, that establishes his authority, but he states that all authority has been given to you. Now, what he's actually doing, he's hearkening back to a prophecy that they would have known. It's in the book of Daniel, where Daniel had a dream, and he dreamt about the Messiah to come, and he said he will come with all authority, and he will impart that authority on you to go, right? And so Jesus is hearkening back this charge, this direction that would have been embedded in these disciples' culture for thousands of years, this hope of this Messiah to come who would send them. So think about this charge to go and make disciples as having 2,000 years of momentum behind it, of hope, of rituals and prayers and celebrations and ceremonies that acknowledge this day is coming. The day is coming where we'll be sent to the world to be a blessing to the nations, right? And so all of this power of this 2,000 years of anticipation is coming. This thing, this story, this meal that they've had every year that reminds them of this moment is going to come, that their grandfathers and great-grandfathers believed in, the hope that they prayed for, this power behind it, 2,000 years of this, and it comes. All authority has been given unto me. Jesus just hearkened that 2,000 years of expectation. And he says, now go and make disciples of all nations. Go and fulfill your purpose as God's people to share the love of Jesus with the loved of Jesus. And who are the loved of Jesus? Everybody. So even your enemies, your neighbors, yourself. We go and we share the love of Jesus. That is the power behind that statement, and it makes sense that these 12 went and literally changed the landscape of the world. And we are here because of those 12's faithfulness to go and make disciples. And then every generation has taken that charge to go. And we have either honored it or dishonored it. In some ways, we are passing on, or look at us right now, we are inheriting either a curse or a blessing based on how generations before us has responded to this Great Commission. Did they respond to this Great Commission with the next generation in mind? Did they respond to this Great Commission with this idea that I'm going to sacrifice now so the next generation can flourish? Or did they say, this church just isn't for me, or this style isn't mine, or I don't like the way this happens, and so I'm going to go find one that suits my needs? We are faced with that same conundrum right now, right here. Let this be your day where you take this charge that says, go therefore. If you're a disciple of Jesus, you make disciples. There's no such thing as a disciple of Jesus that doesn't make disciples. So you are a disciple maker of Jesus. And the freedom that we have is what that means is that we are free to love people, and especially where they don't expect it, especially when it's hard and we have to die to ourselves and sacrifice. Then we're showing someone this sacrificial love. I believe that sacrificial love is the most beautiful kind of love that has ever existed. It's the most powerful love that's ever existed, and there's no better example of sacrificial love than Jesus Christ. So when we talk about this charge to go and love, we love with agape love that is willing to lay down our preferences, lay down our rights, lay down our comforts for the sake of the blessing of others. And we direct that generationally to say, for the sake of the next generation. This is the heartbeat behind our church. This has been the conviction of my calling for 12 years. And, my heart breaks because some people can't get on board with that, but I can't shake this. So when we as a church are looking at where we are now, who we are today, we're posed with this question. What are we doing? How are we responding to this call to discipleship? And what ways are we responding to it that will be a burden for the next generation to have to figure out? And in what ways are we responding to it that will be a blessing?